Welcome to the Ripened Heart podcast, where we explore the depths of the human psyche through the lens of homeopathy, human design, and astrology for soul-deep healing. Each episode will feature vulnerable and thought-provoking conversations highlighting healing modalities that help us shift our perspective on what it means to be a healthy and fulfilled human being in today's world. I'm your host, Kaylee Anello. Let's dive into the podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ripened Heart podcast. I know it's been a little while since I've recorded one of these, so I am so excited. I've just felt really called to start back up this podcast again and really just continue to bring the focus on homeopathy. As many of you already know about me, I'm in my second year of school, so roughly 2.5 years in, but I've been self-prescribing, for 7 years. So you could say it's a little bit of a passion of mine. And I'm so excited for today's guest. She's somebody who I've known about for, I think, about a year now. I heard her on the Queer Spirit podcast, and I just loved everything about her work and what she brings to the field of homeopathy. I think it's something that homeopathy needs more of, which we'll get into. But her name is Kathleen Scheible, and sorry, Kathleen. And she is a classical homeopath, and she studied at the Pacific Academy of Homeopathy in San Francisco. She's practiced since 2005. And she went on to found the Bay Area Homeopathy Association in 2007. She's the current president of the California Homeopathic Medical Society, and she practices in the Bernal Heights neighborhood in San Francisco. She also started a free clinic at the Bernal Heights Neighborhood Center, and she does a lot of volunteer work with homeopathy and practices at the community well in San Francisco. She's basically just a shining pillar in her community. And I'm just like flabbergasted at all the things she's been involved in. So I just cannot wait to have her on and to get into all of this stuff. So welcome, Kathleen. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for doing this work. I think it's incredible.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And so, how I really like to start off homeopathic podcasts, I always love to hear the guest's homeopathy origin story because, I think a lot of people, even in the health and wellness world, they're like, what is this thing called homeopathy? It's so like mystical and hard to comprehend. And so I always love to see how people came to be a homeopath and how they discovered it, because from what I understand of your background, you were an engineer. So you're kind of like on the complete opposite end. You weren't in wellness at all. So please tell us, how did you find homeopathy?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. And I always love hearing everybody's story about this. I think we do come, surprisingly, most people would be surprised to know how far-flung the places that we come into homeopathy from. Because it really is an incredible diversity. And honestly, I think the thing I have in common with almost everyone else who goes into studying, becoming a homeopath, is a testament to the incredible nature of the efficacy of homeopathy. And that was certainly true for me. I did not know, I did not know anything about homeopathy when I found a homeopath for my son, who was experiencing some, pretty medium level, but very common nowadays, health issues such as asthma, eczema, and glue ear. He had a lot of antibiotics when he was a baby for ear infections. And so I think, as we know, there are many layers of kind of susceptibility that get set up, not only from conventional suppression of symptoms, but from many areas. And so and here's another thing I'll say about, being an engineer and the commonality with homeopathy. I mean, I really believe that in engineering, well, I know what we're doing is finding solutions that work. There are scientific principles that it's based on and that guide us into what's likely to work and how do we measure, efficacy essentially, or traction on what we're doing. But in my mind, it's kind of similar in a way. You're observing patterns and you're really just trying to find what's getting you to where you want to go. That's unlike academic scientific research in a way. And again, they're related, but they're different. And so, I was in product development in the semiconductor equipment industry. So I had gone to engineering school in my home state of Michigan, and then, just was kind of blown away at what I perceived as the egalitarian nature of Silicon Valley in the 90s. And I think it really was, in a way that maybe it's not so much anymore. So it was a really interesting and eye-opening time to be an engineer in a place that was really exciting, actually. And I felt like I worked with some really amazing, smart people from all over the world who really taught me some basic principles about how to push yourself, how to know whether or not you're on the right track, how to kind of push yourself in the way of taking accountability for finding something that, is really going to work in the best way you need it to. So I do think there are parallels in those fields.
Yeah, you're so right, because I think the other parallel that I'm seeing is that with homeopathy, in some of the other medical fields, there's a lot of theory and kind of putting things together in a different way that are under the surface. Kind of like, well, maybe the gut issue is because of H. pylori, or maybe it's because of this. There's so many unknowns. You're kind of making an educated guess on what the root cause is. Whereas homeopathy, it's like, we're taking you at face value of like, okay, so you have a stomach ache that occurs when you have a headache. It doesn't really matter why. It's just like what you're presenting with. It's very like, here it is. Okay, these are the pieces we need to put together for your remedy. There's no really guesswork involved.
That's right. And for that reason, but it makes it very powerful. And I would say the principles are very reliable in my experience. At the same time, it removes it from people's framework of how to understand medicine, right? And I'm sure we could talk about that all day long. But anyway, so I would say, like, I also, just as a matter of my bio, I grew up in the Midwest on a farm, on a hay farm. So I grew up working class in a very kind of practically oriented family and family history. I grew up driving tractors and picking rocks out of fields.
A fellow Midwesterner.
Yeah.
I'm from the Midwest too. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so I think that also informed a couple of things. One, my tendency both in engineering and in homeopathy to first and foremost look for connection to the most amount of people and to practicality. If I started to describe what I do to most of the people where I grew up, I think the question wouldn't be so much to try to understand the nuance of the history of homeopathy. It would be like a lot of the underserved folks I'm serving now with homeopathy, and hope for the future is, what can homeopathy actually help us with? Because
yes, I love this. Yes.
We don't necessarily, most people, there's so many alternatives that can be helpful to people, and to try to understand them all is a big job. So I think more of us, and myself included, it's a journey, like, could be more well-versed in just the practical aspect of what can we help people with. But so kind of to circle back around to getting into homeopathy, again, my son, and I was a single parent for many years until my son was around 11. And then I got together with my partner who, her son is at the same age, actually. And within, yeah. And then within that first year, I think that we had gotten together, both of our kids had some kind of like a little bit of a health crisis. And so interesting. And so my son, had this kind of lifelong glue ear issue. And I was in addition to the asthma and eczema more recently. And I was frustrated with it, but I was definitely coming from a more conventional background. But we had been going to the pediatrician, trying all the things and the suppressive therapies. And so I just started looking around more at what else might help, and actually found osteopathy and cranial sacral manipulation, a very
Oh,
experienced osteopath here in the Bay Area, Henny Scholars. And she was the first person to help my son. And, his ears would clear for like a week at a time, and then they would go back. And
mhm.
this happened over and over again. And she said, I think I've helped you as much as I can for now, and it's something's kind of blocking his progress. And so she referred us to a homeopath, well-known, sort of more pediatric focused homeopath, Lynn Ferrugia, who, and again, I knew nothing about it. It was kind of early days of the internet still, as far as like finding things. And so I just, based on her recommendation, took my son to see Lynn, and didn't realize that it wasn't just about the ears, that it was really about everything that was going on with him. And honestly, within a dose or two of a remedy, and within a few weeks, all three of his, symptoms and conditions were much, much better, to the point that we didn't need the inhaler, we didn't need the steroid creams. His ears were, much better. And so it was like, wow, I didn't even fully realize, to it. Of course, as we know, it's difficult to attribute so much change to a single dose of a remedy
Mhm.
when you don't really understand the system. So, but at the same time, so 6 months earlier, my stepson had developed sequela from having had spinal meningitis, viral
Wow.
meningitis. And he had been treated for that at UCSF, and he no longer had the meningitis, but he had chronic, very debilitating migraine headaches and nausea every day. So he had been out of school for 6 months with those symptoms, and it was really difficult for our family at that time, because it was just hard to understand. And he kept getting tested for more and more things at various medical, specialties. And it was a traumatic experience for all of us,
Absolutely.
and so we, after the success with homeopathy with my son, we took my stepson to see the homeopath. And I mean, it doesn't always happen this way, just for those of you in the audience. But literally, again, within a dose or two of Nux vomica, he was his old self again. Like,
Wow.
really, no more migraines, no more stomach upset. And he was back in school the following week. And that was
Incredible.
resolved for him. I think we took him back to the homeopath later in life for allergies or something, but that resolved that. We now wonder about whether or not maybe his vagus nerve had been inflamed from the spinal tap process or something like that. But regardless, again, with homeopathy, we're looking at the symptoms. So regardless of what's really the root cause, but also we could observe his emotional state that went with it. Now I look back and realize he was having some emotional stuff come up, and anger being chief amongst them. So yeah, so that's fundamentally, I was so blown away by those one and then the other, so much better from homeopathy. So I said, I think I need to try to understand this, and find out more about it. And then when I went to a talk by a local school, and I was just fascinated, and it sort of appealed to the many parts of my brain, my
Mhm.
desire to be helping people more, in addition to still having some analytical challenge, with the work. And so, yeah, within that same year, I was enrolled at Pacific Academy and studying while I was still continuing to work full time as an engineer. So it was a little crazy as far as my workload, and don't recommend that if you can at all.
That's what passion does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just you brought up something so interesting. we're talking about, kind of the difference sometimes of other healing modalities and homeopathy. And what I've seen is homeopathy is this incredible ability to hold. So like you were saying, your son's ear would clear for a week or two and he would have to continue going back. It wasn't getting at the root of it. I'm just always so blown away at how homeopathy manages to get to that root where there's no more susceptibility to that. It kind of clears it. Maybe it comes back a couple of times and you have to repeat the remedy, but oftentimes it'll be less severe or shorter duration. And then it just kind of, that you're not susceptible to it anymore. It's just not part of your inclination. And I'm also just really touched by the fact that, you took something that was so hard and traumatic and you turned it into something so powerful and beautiful that would go on to help so many people. I think that's such a cool part of your story. So just wanted to remark on that too.
Yeah, and I would add to that, like, at the same time, I have an enormous amount of respect for so many different healing traditions and modalities. And I observe that we find our way to what we need when we need it. And sometimes people need other things. Sometimes people need to go to the doctor, frankly.
Yeah.
Sometimes people need manual medicine, and that has to do with the nature of the medicine, but it also has to do with us as humans, right?
Totally.
So it's
yeah, exactly. And I just, there's always like an openness to whatever the person needs coming in, as homeopaths, I know you're like this as well. Whatever they need, even if it's not you just want them to get better, and it's cool to see that. I've seen with homeopathy, what's happened as well for people is that their internal compass speaks a little bit louder. And it's almost like they bring in what they need, whether it's a different healer, a different modality, a different whatever it is, life circumstance, job. It kind of just sets them on the right course in a way. Have you seen that in your practice?
I definitely see that in my practice all the time, every single week. And it was also a part of my story, frankly, in getting started with homeopathy, because as much as, the success with my kids was the main driver, I then decided to go see my son's homeopath to sort of see what is it like to experience this for myself if I'm thinking about studying it. And, I sort of went in, I was a very overworked, harried parent in those days. And I was, had a very conventional framework for probably everything. And so I think I went in thinking, well, there's nothing, wrong with me really. So I'm not sure what we're going to talk about for an hour and a half, like so many people. And we found things to talk about for sure, including my, plowing through life, overworking and over responsibility and, sort of this heading towards burnout. And that was something that I had experienced as well in prior. So we talked a lot about that. And then all the ways in the body, my body, that those things would show up when I got tired, and tendency to get cold sores or tendency to get, sore throats or this or that. So it was like for so many, it's just interesting to me coming out and taking some pellets one time. And then sure enough, so I have been grappling with the idea of if I want to study this, but I don't see a way out of this really specialized, highly paid engineering job when I'm the main breadwinner in my household. We have my insurance. And how is this going to work? And then, after I had that remedy, I stopped worrying about that. And I just started looking for a different engineering job that would cut out my commute. So that gave me back a couple hours a day and a lot of energy. And I found it. I looked for 6 months, but I found sort of the perfect job that would allow me to make this transition. And it is interesting. I've looked back and I didn't realize at the time or connect it with the remedy, and then also I didn't get those things that I tend to get when I'm run down for 5 years after that remedy, really with no other homeopathics.
Yeah, you're bringing up a couple important things here. I know If you guys have listened to my episode with my mentor, Doug Brown, we talked a little bit about this, where a good homeopathic remedy, it's like getting a new glasses prescription, where suddenly you can see like the periphery, all the possibilities, all the options you had that you couldn't see because you're wearing, foggy glasses. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, wait, there is a solution to this. I can take a different job. It's really interesting. And so I've just noticed that. I don't know, that is the thing about homeopathy, is you can't really explain why it does that thing. The best way to describe it is that just that it helps the entire person, mental, spiritual, emotional, physical, everything. And it just, when you're feeling better and more positive, then you can see the possibilities.
That's
And
right.
so
And
that's really interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and kind of getting out of what we may not recognize as being in anxiety or fear, or
Yeah,
like repetitive thoughts that aren't helping us so much, you know.
totally.
But I think it's deeper than that, frankly.
Oh, totally. I completely agree with you. And the other thing, I love that you spoke about, how it was scary to transition from a job that was kind of a sure thing and to step into the unknown. You were the breadwinner, you had insurance. And a lot of people I've spoken to who listen to the podcast, they are interested in doing more unconventional careers. And it's really scary for them to make that decision. And, some people have kind of been forced out of jobs just because of COVID and everything has changed, where I was just listening to a podcast this morning and she described it as like we're all kind of in spiritual boot camp right now. It's like everything that wasn't working is falling away and we're having to look at it so much more. And I think that homeopathy is such a great companion to feeling supported in that process.
Mm.
It's not just something that helps a chronic cold or the physical symptoms. It's like if you need support in your life because you're going through a big transition, it's
Yes.
something that can be really helpful.
Yes, I can speak to that. I mean, I would say during these pandemic almost years now,
Yeah.
I have done some of the deepest work with clients for sure.
Wow.
Not every single client, but many clients who, I feel like it's a time when we're all sort of finding or moving more into the things that we trust.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about your gut, right? And not everyone's in touch with that. But for those that are, I see people sort of doubling down on those things or going deeper into those things. And so for my clients who are at that place with homeopathy, like major transformation work is happening and possible. And at the same time, I'm really passionate about meeting people at a wide spectrum of where they are needing help, holistic help,
Mm-hmm.
with homeopathy, including for the cold, including for the recurrent infections.
Mm-hmm.
It really is an amazing medicine in that way that we can. And I think as homeopaths, I think more of us could practice conceiving of what we do and pull it back to that level for some people and
Mm-hmm.
really recognize how we can meet people where they are and be more homeopathic to each person in that way.
Yeah, it's like I'm not going to get the exact quote right, but it's in like the Organon, which is kind of like the homeopathic origin, Bible from by Samuel Hahnemann. He says that our job is really to just free up the life force
Mhm.
to make somebody, more balanced in health, and that they'll naturally, go on their path freed up of what they're meant to do. And so, there is no like judgment or like you have to go this deep with homeopathy. It's like, no, if you have an acute illness that's stopping you from being able to, earn a living, or, it's stopping in your life, like homeopathy can show up for you in that way. And I completely agree that that's what I like about homeopathy, is you can really tailor it to the person and their immediate needs. And we've seen that, it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like if your basic needs aren't being met, you're
That's
going to
right.
need help with that. And
Yes.
so this is kind of a good segue into some of the community work that you do, Kathleen, that you've done in your community, just more and more. I would love for you to speak about that.
Yeah, sure. It is something I'm passionate about. And again, I think it does go back to probably my Midwestern roots and growing
Mhm.
up in a really small town where that kind of like, in a way, community, just making sure and trying to make sure the needs of everyone in your community, immediate community, are being met, because we are part of a whole system, right?
Mhm.
Um, and that I say that in a very problematic city of San Francisco that has now, especially after 2 years of pandemic, the biggest inequality in the US, maybe in parts of the world. So I believe in acting locally, and I
Mhm.
believe in connecting with community, because I think that's where we have the biggest impact.
Mhm.
It's not to say we shouldn't act on the bigger levels and get involved on, and I have gotten since involved in advocacy for homeopathy on a national level, but honestly, I believe, again, we're part of a community, and so
Mhm.
understanding who that is, how
Mhm.
we are part of it, what's our, what in a way, what's our responsibility, and what we cannot help people with. The community has needs that don't involve homeopathy, that are basic needs.
Of course.
But feeling this way, I did start pretty early in my career. Had approached the Bernal Heights Neighborhood Center, which mainly serves elders, seniors, and also youth, helping them find part-time jobs and that sort of thing. But the senior program is probably the focus there. And it's really about connecting seniors. I think there's meals that they could have, activities, movement, gentle movement, and different things, bingo.
Of course.
Also, the UCSF nursing students would come in once a week and give blood pressure readings. And so I ended up working on the same day as the nurses. And we had for many years developed kind of not a partnership, but sort of a relationship where many of them were interested in what I was doing, interested in homeopathy, not all, but definitely more than I thought would be. And so for a while, we gave joint talks to the seniors about conventional approach to high blood pressure, homeopathic, approach with some examples of the top remedies. And then it's kind of like, then come and work with me if you if you want to explore that from a homeopathic perspective, because it's definitely not a self-care kind of condition.
Mhm.
But that was interesting, and it's interesting. Again, it was the start of my sort of like, what happens when I branch out of my private practice office, alone in my office with a one-on-one client, and go to a place where the seniors are already going to get other needs met. And so in that way, it's really convenient for them to come and talk to me for 15 minutes or a half an hour, or however long, and they start to learn about it, and I start
Mhm.
to also learn, like, what is their need in my own community. It's really interesting. There are many immigrant seniors in my neighborhood, and I mean, frankly, there's a lot of trauma, but there's also a lot of, and people are on a lot of medications in the
Mhm.
US, so there's challenges, but it's also like, people can have less pain from their arthritis, and that to them is a life-changing,
Oh, yeah.
it's a life-changing thing, because starts to again honor this, like, you can feel better, you can heal, and maybe it's not going to be 100, not going to be like you were when you were 20, but I mean, so that was really, really rewarding work, and it taught me a lot. And also, it was just something I did every couple of weeks. So, and people would see me, all these folks see me at the grocery store, they see me out and about. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like a little urban
They really
village.
get to know you.
Yeah. So that was really rewarding. Unfortunately, since the pandemic, the senior center hasn't been so alivened with getting the seniors back in there,
Mhm.
or fortunately, unfortunately. But in any case, I'm not sure that program is going to continue. Um, but I have started some other endeavors in this realm of things, which we can talk about if we have time. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to talk about some of the other things you've got going on right now? I'd love to hear about it.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the biggest impacts, and a lot of my time has been devoted in the last few years has been working with the Integrative Healers Action Network.
Mhm.
And I guess just real quickly about them. So they formed after the 2017 Tubbs fire here in Sonoma County. And that was, at least for this region, it was the first in a recent spate of increasingly devastating wildfires in Northern
Mhm.
California. So it was, and I would say it was a shock to that community because
Mhm.
they're not, some of the further out geographically communities closer to the Sierra Nevadas are a little more accustomed to the idea, maybe similar in Southern California to Santa Ana winds or something like that, where it's like awareness of the possibility. Whereas so close to kind of, you know, urban, suburban area, it was caught a lot of people off guard. People lost their homes. People were injured. You know, it was traumatic. And then so I had reached out to them at that time. They managed to start working within the local Red Cross shelter, integrative practitioners, side by side with medical practitioners, but different, you know. And that was amazing to me because I thought, wow, you know, a lot of us want to do something when our immediate community has been impacted by a
Mhm.
disaster, but logistically, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
You know, and you need to be careful about how you're doing it and the safety for people to understand sort of what you're doing and that they
Mhm.
feel safe and you can provide care in an efficacious way, in a safe trauma informed way. It's no small task.
No.
So I was pretty amazed by them. But again, because they had just started working with the Red Cross, they were only working with licensed practitioners at that time. So then fast forward a year later, the Camp Fire in Paradise was the deadliest, I believe it's the deadliest fire in California history. Um, and that was very devastating. At the same time, you know, again, one thing I've learned about all of these communities, and I think it's a mirror for what we're going through as a society, is
Mhm.
like these have turned from discrete, what we thought of as unusual, you know, traumatic events,
Mhm.
disasters, we called them, right? But we're sort of, I hate to say, but we're sort of moving into a time where this is becoming normal,
Mhm.
not only from climate change, you know, wildfires, but so many things, you
Mhm.
know. And so I think within IHAN and within community-based healthcare in general, people have seen like this massive need. Also, there's a massive amount of resilience. You know, people are really are resilient. When things get bad enough, we often can find that in
Yeah.
ourselves. You
Yeah.
know, we search for it in different ways, or we maybe remember things about our ancestry, our history, our family, you know, that taught us how to know ourselves and taught
Mhm.
us how to find the resources we need. So I think people are doing that, you know.
Yeah.
uh,
Absolutely. And that's really interesting you bring that up because I've seen that as a theme in the last, and well, since 2020 is people feeling more compelled to connect to their ancestry. You
mhm,
know, even if they don't have a great family of origin, finding
mhm.
strength and resilience in connecting to their ancestral line and to that culture. You know, I myself, I finally got like the ancestry DNA test. You know, I was feeling that pull too
Yeah,
of like, where did I come from? You know, what were the practices and traditions that they did? How did they seek resilience in really hard times?
yeah.
And so I think it's interesting to explore that.
It is, and it reminds me of another element of, you know, working so much with trauma, both through IHAN and in my private practice, and also at Community Well, which is another place I have together with another homeopath, have a free homeopathic clinic for low-income San Francisco residents. And that is funded by the San Francisco Sugary Drinks Tax.
Mhm.
So we actually get paid for our time, which is really nice because I think for doing more of this kind of work, I also have a passion that as homeopaths, we need to have sustainable practice.
Mhm.
And to scale homeopathy, which is I'm also passionate about, I think we need opportunities within communities that exist, paid opportunities to do what we do, and to be in community with other practitioners, kinds of practitioners, and to have accountability to the community with a structure and a framework, and for people to understand we're part of, the healing world in relationship to other kinds of things. So Community Well is amazing. I'll just mention them. They're founded by two Filipino women who really have created an amazing model for a community nonprofit that sort of meets their neighborhood where they are, and said, we want to find holistic modalities that really help people learn about their health. In addition to just, yes, you can give somebody something, but the thing they liked about homeopathy, and also their version of food as medicine, their version of like a move more class, is kind of like literally like finding like really practical ways for people to engage with their own state of health, and then in an empowering kind of way. So it's been really interesting to remind ourselves that that's what we should be doing when we're practicing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you brought up something that I've been really passionate and thinking about a lot recently, is that, COVID, we had to adapt very quickly to a new environment. And a lot of that meant going more digital with things. And the reason I love your work is you're constantly bringing it back to the local community, which I think in some sense is being lost just in the era of the internet.
Yeah.
And something that I found in Portland is, Portland is going through a lot of struggle too. The Pacific Northwest in general, similarly with fires and just a lot of poverty, just so many. I mean, I could sit here all day. It's devastating. And and I say this completely without judgment of anybody. But what I just notice is there's a tendency to just want to move away instead of staying and helping to fix it. It's just like, oh, well, this community is experiencing these problems. I'm just going to move out and go somewhere else. And what I'm just so struck by is like, first of all, not everybody has that option. That's right. Secondly, just how committed you are to helping your local community, no matter what's going through, the fires, the trauma, everything. You're like, no, I'm going to stick here and I'm going to help. It's tremendous. It's important.
It's important. And I think it's, and again, I want to talk about something here that is, it might be controversial, and certain, as everything is becoming so polarized and controversial. And I don't give energy to that.
We're all open to conversation on this podcast.
Yeah. So, I mean, the other personal work that I've done, since George Floyd was murdered, frankly, is starting to do my own trauma healing around, internalized racism, and white culture, white supremacist culture. So, I mean, it's interesting to me that it was Community Well founders that asked all of us practitioners to together take an online course together around doing that work, and then there are actually very few white practitioners at Community Well. So, but it was a mixed group that we did a course called Trauma Literacy. And they used Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, which some people might be familiar with. I highly recommend not only the book, but for people to work through it in a group if possible. So the subtitle is Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. And so he's amazing and is doing amazing work in the world. So many others as well. But so that was my first experience in like kind of saying, oh, I have some personal responsibility here to just start to create it. And this is where I think it gets really, with the polarization around doing work around anti-racism, I think it gets really charged. I feel that it, like so many other things, maybe like meditation or like any other kind of self-care, I feel like it's a process. It's a process of engaging in dialogue and on the positive side, learning,
Mm-hmm.
self-improvement. Maybe on the more negative side, perhaps like just minimizing the amount of harm we can do in the world,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So, and, I know a lot of homeopaths who would say we don't do that because we're objective observers. Well, we're just calling ourselves that. And yes, that's the ideal in homeopathy, is to be as objective as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But as we know from the scientific world and quantum physics,
Mm-hmm.
being an observer necessarily changes what is being observed,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
whether or not you have a lot of biases, the point is, until we start to create some inner dialogue and process, we don't know what's there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when we talk to our clients about whatever their unconscious, as we all have unconscious fears and anxieties, and how those things tend to affect us in ways that we don't realize, because the more we suppress them or don't have any dialogue with knowing what's there,
Mm-hmm.
then those things come out in a way that we feel like we're not controlling, like things just happen to us, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're bringing up so much in my mind. I don't know where to begin, but so I'm an astrology nerd. You may not know this about me. What I do usually to get like more of a zoomed out perspective on things of like, what are the energies that are impacting us, and what is being called to heal, is I look at the astrology.
Mhm.
And so what's so interesting about these times is a couple of things, and you don't have to like know astrology super deep to understand these themes. I'll try to break them down. So first of all, Chiron is like the planet of the wounded healer. Wherever Chiron is transiting is where wounds show up. So Chiron is in Aries, which is identity, who we are. That's where we're feeling wounded as a collective right now. That's why all these things are coming up. And then in the polarizing heatedness is the nodes of the moon have been in Sagittarius and Gemini. So Sagittarius is like, I'm right, you're wrong. And Gemini is like, wait, let me, collect all the information, see everybody's perspective, talk to my local community, and really have an open mind and maybe change my perspective and not be so rigid in my beliefs. And so my point in bringing this up is that, much like things will come up in our lives to be healed, it's like when these transits are happening astrologically, it's really a call to heal things around that. And that's why it's coming up. And if we do the work now to heal these things, the next time this transit comes around, it's not going to be as, in our face, and it's coming up for a reason. And so it has to be looked at, it has to be acknowledged and seen and worked through, and it's going to look differently for everybody. But I love that you bring that up, because there are no coincidences in why things come up, and so I just think it's really great, and it's a really great call to not ignore it, and even if it's uncomfortable, and to always, to not be so quick to shut things down that make you feel uncomfortable, and to look at it. And I just, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I mean, along those lines too, I really do think that because I guess have been told that I'm someone like within the Bay Area Homeopathy Association, or even within my integrative medical community here in the city, try to always help to create space and hold space for people who have different ideas about how, we often think we're trying to do the same thing. And here's this whole big group of homeopaths, but then immediately people started in the beginning saying, but what about, how did people study, and is it classical or not classical? And, I think those things can be important from a homeopathic theoretical standpoint.
Yes. You
But
read my mind. I was thinking about that. That was going to be my next question. Yeah.
yeah, but what I saw at the inception of Baja for the Greater Opportunity was that we have organizations and structures for parsing out those issues in a way. This is for connecting people who align with homeopathy on really any level, because
Yeah.
I felt strongly that, like, even within the Bay Area, most go interview 20 people on the street. Nobody really knows what homeopathy is.
Yeah, yeah. So that brings me to my question then is, what's the difference that you see when you're working in private practice? I assume it's more of a classical standpoint to how you approach it when you're in these community organizations or, really treating acute trauma. It seems like you've kept an open mind to how you use remedies, because what I see is there's a lot of dogma around like classical, there's one remedy and you have to do it this way. And part of part of my belief expansion, I guess you could say, that I've gone through is like, hey, you can add in a flower essence, you can add in Banerjee
Yes.
protocols, you can do practical, you can do it all. And it's like you were saying earlier, it ties in perfectly with, you have to meet the person where they're at and treat them homeopathically for what they need, and not to be stuck in a way of doing things. And I'm sure treating people in the way that you have has had to make you more adaptable as a homeopath.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, again, I want to kind of distinguish between the homeopathic theory of
Please do.
practice of of what, as a classical homeopath, I am grateful to all the great, homeopaths that come before me within that tradition, who have both reinforced, some of Samuel Hahnemann's original ideas, and also pulled away from it, pulled out from it, expanded up against it, found different ways of thinking about that system. When I was studying at Pacific Academy, I mean, it was a classical homeopathy program, but it was in pretty stark contrast to a very Kentian classical homeopathy school that also existed in San Francisco at that time. And I knew nothing of these things, but just in sort of interviewing at both schools, I thought, I think I'm more inclined to be in the realm of like being pretty open to the evolution of homeopathy, which Pacific Academy, I would say, was, even though we stuck to learning classical homeopathy, but it was always like sort of zooming out and seeing like, well, what does it really mean? Like, we're open to the idea that things may change and new systems may come along that help us refine this idea or have a different lens on how this is actually working for people. And so I have retained that attitude. I would say I practice classical, but what I would say is, for being in the US, first of all, I would say like practicing in the Western rich countries, we in our world, what we call homeopathy, which is, I have to remind my colleagues sometimes, like, we're a very small group compared to the number of people who are consuming and giving homeopathic remedies around the world. So just to put that into context, we might call ourselves the homeopaths or whatever, but in reality, the world has taken homeopathy and is trying to like help themselves with the remedies, right? And to various degrees. And I know, like, and I agree, I find problems with, I agree, people can prove remedies, and they didn't think they could experience something negative from homeopathy, but they do if they just start taking something they don't need. All that stuff is real. But so to answer your question about how I practice in these community-based settings, I think it's much more similar to how, for example, homeopathy is practiced in India or in Mexico, in the sense of, we're having a 15 or 20-minute consultation. And as a homeopath, I need to get better at looking what's right in front of me, and also asking the person what they need help with. As a means of like, I'm coming maybe into your space and into your community. I may not know anything about what you really need help with right now. And so having that humility around, and with the work with IHAN, I've worked both in more acute traumatic situations where people are in shelters and they're in shock, they're in trauma, and they have access to conventional medical care, but they're often very dysregulated. And they come into an IHAN clinic, and it's been interesting too to work with my colleagues to sort of formulate, not a rigid way, but sort of say, this person can't have any manual therapy right now. Like, they may not know that, but
Mhm.
we need to be responsible, and like they might be open to ear seed acupuncture. They might
Mhm.
be able to talk a bit with a homeopath to kind of convey their state. And if they've had a homeopathic remedy and then the homeopath lets them sit and we go check in with them in another 20 minutes and see how they're doing. Because in that
Wow.
moment, it really is acute. So we're giving the remedy based on what you see and what you're hearing and perceiving of the dysregulation.
Mhm.
And that's all we're trying to help them with. We're not talking about childhood stuff. We're not
Right.
really going back and talking about even the fire, unless that's right
Mhm.
where they go. But,
Mhm.
we're just trying to help them be more grounded and centered, more resilient in that moment so they can go fill out their FEMA paperwork, or they can go, it is probably going to help them in many ways, physically, mentally, emotionally, that they may not recognize in the future. But I believe in, again, that this is just a matter of meeting people where they are. I think it's
Mhm.
still classical homeopathy, whether you call it an acute or whether you just call it sort of an acute state of, I mean, y-
Sure.
you know, so and I think it's excellent. I think it's excellent experience for homeopaths to experience a range
Mhm.
of where and how we can meet people responsibly. I mean, actually, at the IHAN clinics now, we limit all the treatments to 20 minutes as a part of a trauma informed principle. That if people are experiencing acute and oftentimes get triggered chronic trauma,
Mm.
um, we don't like nervous system wise going past around that time is actually not helping them.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes so
And
much sense.
so it's been interesting, and we have developed and received a lot of training at IHAN about trauma informed care and how each of our disciplines should be operating within that framework. And and also just cultural humility, sensitivity, awareness. Not everybody wants to talk about their deepest stuff.
Yeah.
And likewise, I mean, there are other there are other orientations we need to be aware of, so that we're, again, not like injuring people more than we're helping them in trying to
Mm.
provide some kind of care.
Yeah. Yeah. I've totally seen that from shadowing. I shadow in a private practice that's classical homeopathy. And what I've found really interesting is that I've noticed that, and this is not always the case, but in some patients, there's almost like this firewall where it's like their body knows not to go there. So they
Mm,
won't really get deep into what they're experiencing in the first visit, even though, we allot plenty of time to get into all of that. But it's like
sure.
there's this protective firewall that I find so interesting. And then they'll get like the first remedy that kind of maybe heals a layer of it. And then it opens up the next chapter for us,
Hmm.
where it's like, okay, now I'm ready to talk about this and to tell you about this. I'm ready to think about that again. And I think in a way that's kind of what you're speaking to in a different way is like, hey, like, some people, it's not appropriate to go back into childhood and to go through like, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you or something like that. And then of course with the acutes, it's like, well, they just need to be able to, like you said, fill out paperwork.
Yeah,
So, but I think it just speaks to a bigger issue of nervous system dysregulation, and just that, that some people can't even be touched, like you were saying, or get the help that they need for chronic pain because of that. And there's just so much nuance.
there is. And I think that's is something I'm becoming more aware of myself, and I'm sure I will continue to be, but I'm also hoping to bring in this conversation to the larger homeopathic community,
Mhm.
because as much as we often idealize what we do, and it is an amazing medicine,
Mhm.
I think we have some blind spots about some of this, of how we approach our work. And just like as you say, I mean, some people aren't, have that firewall. We all have our firewall.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
it's part of being human.
Yeah.
And whether or not you have what would be considered trauma in a clinical way,
Right.
I mean, in a way, we all have, and we may not even be conscious of what's there. So I think just normalizing for homeopaths to expect and kind of to approach more with caution and care and
Mhm.
not pathologize that tendency for people to have a limit. They
Mm.
don't know us.
Mhm.
Some of
Mhm.
them don't know what we're doing. And so
Mhm.
I think that's the education piece as well that I would
Mhm.
love to see homeopathy brought out more into the world, finding ways to talk about what we're doing that's not grounded in a 200-year-old esoteric language
Sure.
and, all of this. I mean, it's fascinating and I
Mhm.
respect the history, but, we all know like most people don't relate to that. They want to
Yeah.
understand how we can help them. So, how can we find ways of just creating trust and creating some boundaries around what our expectations,
Mhm.
how quickly we're going to get there, how quickly we're going to know, all the information for the perfect remedy, which I don't really believe exists. I
Mhm.
mean, I believe in the concept of simillimum. I just think most of the time we're practicing with helpful remedies rather
Mhm.
than simillimums.
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I think we can do a tremendous amount of good in the world if we accept that.
Mhm.
And um, and also, again, kind of being proceed with cautions, especially with communities that are not, to the extent that they're not our own same community, that we may not understand fully what the needs are. um,
Yeah. And so bearing this in mind, what would be your new and improved elevator speech for what homeopathy is and what it can do then?
Great question. Okay. Yeah, I think I say this quite a bit. Um, it's a natural form of medicine. It's holistic. So we're really treating the person rather than one specific condition or symptom, or you know. And um and that's about it, actually. And sometimes if there's a little more to it, a little longer elevator ride, I would say, it's similar to other holistic systems of
Mhm.
medicine in scope, but it's different in that
Mhm.
we're utilizing tiny fractions of a material dose of natural substance to stimulate the body's own healing response.
Love it. Beautifully concise and well put. And I love how humble you are. Like that's just what really strikes me about you is you're so humble about what you do. And you really just want to see people get better and you're doing it for the greatest good of humanity in your community. And I really admire that. So thank you for your work. I really
Well,
appreciate it.
it's very gratifying work to do. And as I'm sure you know, and you said you're in Portland, but I believe it's all over the country. There's a great need. There's a mental health crisis.
Yes.
There's trauma. There's, polarization. All these things are traumatizing people, regardless of
Mhm.
where you are on the political spectrum, where you
Mhm.
are anywhere. I believe like there's so much right now that people need um, additional tools. And again, whether it's homeopathy or, so I do wish that we had more ideas, and I'm open for people who want to talk to me about this offline another
Mhm.
time, brainstorm about how we can kind of scale and create more opportunities in communities all over the US. I mean, it's already all over the world in many ways, but um, to to be there. Maybe it's just acute care clinics to help reduce the amount of antibiotics that are being overprescribed.
Mhm.
Maybe it's more than that, but I do see in my work with both IHAN and with Community Well, part of what's beautiful about that, doing it that way, is you're in kind of a framework or an umbrella organization, which helps us as practitioners. Maybe you've got somebody on admin helping to schedule and also helping to orient people to what you're offering them. That's incredibly helpful. And also people, again, know to go to this place, or they feel safe in going here because it's a bit of an umbrella of something they recognize.
Mm.
You know, and like especially after the disaster work, I was talking with a group of homeopaths before we connected up with IHAN about maybe going to Paradise, Chico area and doing homeopathy because we wanted to do something. And we started talking about how is this going to work? We're like, we're going to be setting up a table, handing out little white pellets to people who are in trauma, like who don't know us. Like that's it's kind of absurd. You know, and yes, it is similar to what we're doing at IHAN, but I think we do try to educate people and beware with a somewhat trusted organization that they may at least know they can get some of their basic needs met, and to have, again, some accountability so that they can come back to us the next day or the next week and see us again or tell us how it went for them, you know.
Yeah. So it's bringing me to my wrap-up question here, which is, you know, in practice, what have been some of your biggest lessons or takeaways?
Well, that has definitely changed, been rapidly changing in recent years. I guess, I mean, it's obvious and kind of a cliche, but I mean, the basic capacity for healing and resilience in people is tremendous. And we know that, but I think what I'm learning more about is part of our responsibility as homeopaths is connecting people with that process, like education around that's what's happening. Because often there's a disconnect between we gave a remedy and then someone went away for a month and they don't really understand the connection to the remedy versus all the other things in their lives.
Yep.
But when we can create a framework for more education around, you know, there's what the remedy is doing or not doing, but for us to be in a healing, you know, kind of relationship and collaboration with a person, the most of the importance is in the connection to this process.
Absolutely. I love that. And a bonus question for you. So if you were on a desert island and only had 3 remedies you could take, what would they be?
Oh my goodness, desert island.
What are your most 3 favorite remedies?
Well, unsurprisingly, arnica would be in there, I have to admit,
of course.
You know, of course. I feel like oscillococcinum might be my simillimum somehow. So I think I would bring that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and then third remedy. It's difficult. I would say maybe aconite.
Yeah.
Another boring choice.
That's a good one.
But, you know, the practicality of being on a desert island.
You never know what's going to happen.
That's right.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Kathleen. Please tell the listeners where they can find you.
Yeah, well, my private practice website is bernalhomeopathy.com, BERNAL. I don't know if you have show notes or.
Yeah, it'll be linked below.
Okay. And then integrativehealersactionnetwork.org is another one to find me at. So I think there are others, but those are the most reliable ways to get in touch with me.
And all around Bernal Heights, it sounds like, in San Francisco at large.
Yes, true. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.